In the middle of the vast ocean, far from land, a journey to find the best waves slowly turned into a nightmare. What started as just a trip for surfers to challenge wild waves began to fill with ego, jealousy, and emotions that were getting harder to control. And when everything finally exploded, the calm sea became a witness to how friendship could turn into a deadly threat. Joe was the captain of the boat who had lived side by side with the harshness of the ocean for a long time. For him, big waves and unpredictable weather were nothing new. One day, Joe picked up the guests who would join the trip to a wave spot known for being wild and rarely visited. Before leaving, Joe made sure everything was ready. The first 3 people to arrive were Rob, Archie, and Bull. Among them, Bull was the easiest to recognize. His hair was long, and his attitude looked the most dominant compared to the others.
Hey, Rob.
Not long after that, Tubes arrived with 2 women, Alex and Sam. These 6 people had the same goal: to find the best waves in a place rarely visited by other surfers. For them, this trip wasn't just a vacation, but also a challenge they had been waiting for a long time. After everyone gathered, they got on the boat and started leaving the land behind. Some of them had actually traveled together before, so the atmosphere was pretty relaxed. However, the presence of Alex and Sam slightly changed the group's dynamic. At first, this trip was actually planned only for the men. Tubes still brought Alex because they were in a relationship, and also because Alex was helping with a documentary project she was making about the lives of surfers. Sam came along as Alex's friend. She decided to join the trip to get away from her personal problems for a while.
Man, actually, Alex wants to shoot a doco. Be good for her to be out here.
Joe, as the captain, immediately set the rules from the beginning. He didn't want any problems during the trip. No abusive behavior, no harassment, and no fighting on the boat. Anyone who broke those rules would deal with him directly. On that boat, discipline was non-negotiable. Joe knew that in the middle of the ocean, even one small mistake could end badly.
Zibby at the wheel. Throttle makes you go faster or tells us where to. Feel free to show me those secret brakes, mate.
The next day, the men started facing the big waves that were the main goal of this trip. They rode their surfboards with full adrenaline, challenging the rolling waves that kept coming one after another. At that moment, it felt like the world belonged only to them, and the ocean was their playground. Meanwhile, Alex was busy recording every moment that happened. Sam stayed with her, taking shots from different angles. Their cameras captured laughter, splashes of water, and the kind of togetherness that looked so solid. No one expected that those recordings would one day become witnesses to the cracks forming between them. The mood started to change when Archie suddenly brought up Sam's past. Archie mentioned an old video that once made Sam the talk of many people. Even though it was said in a casual tone, those words immediately made the atmosphere feel different. Some people started looking at Sam in a different way. The trust that had just begun to grow was already shaken by suspicion.
Pulls off her bra, starts rubbing herself. Sam does a strip to some boyfriend.
Not long after that, Sam was seen approaching Rob, who was preparing his fishing gear. It turned out they were both interested in that simple hobby. Their conversation quickly flowed, and the two of them seemed to grow closer. Rob even asked Joe to slow down the boat so Rob could teach Sam how to fish more comfortably. That decision immediately made Bull unhappy. Bull wanted the trip to continue so they could reach the surf spot as soon as possible. A small tension appeared when Bull let out his frustration by pulling Rob's fishing rod. The atmosphere on the boat suddenly became heated. The situation finally calmed down after Sam tried to settle them. Her gentle attitude slowly made Bull hold back his emotions. From that moment on, Bull started seeing Sam in a different way. No longer just a travel companion, Bull began showing another side of himself, sharing many of his life experiences and trying to create moments of togetherness with Sam on the boat. One of the moments Bull remembered the most was when they sat on the anchor hanging at the stern of the boat. For Bull, it felt like they were getting closer, but those feelings didn't go smoothly. At one point, Bull accidentally saw Sam with Rob on the deck of the boat. Rob was helping apply sunblock to Sam's sunburned skin. The sight was actually simple, but it was enough to trigger jealousy. The feelings that had just started to grow were immediately shaken. That uncomfortable feeling grew stronger when Rob got a small injury from a mistake while surfing, and Sam seemed to give him more attention. For Bull, it felt like a defeat that was hard to accept. Slowly, the relationships between them began to change. No longer as warm as before, a quiet distance started to form among them. Ego, jealousy, and suspicion began slipping into their togetherness. Outside the boat, the sea still looked calm. The waves were still beautiful, and the sun was still shining brightly. But inside the boat itself, something was slowly changing. The next day, Archie returned from one of the small islands they had briefly stopped at. When he got back on the boat, his face looked more serious than usual, as if there was something still on his mind. But no one really noticed that change. Each of them was busy with their own matters and tensions.
I'm gonna give it to my reunion. Someone on the island said he remembers you.
Without them realizing it, the small conflicts that once seemed trivial were slowly leading to something much bigger, something that would eventually bring trouble far more dangerous than just arguments on the boat. This time, Archie didn't come back just to talk about his trip. Archie brought a story that immediately changed the atmosphere. With an admiring tone, Archie talked about a foreign surfer he met at one of the surf spots. According to Archie, the man had unusual skills. The way the man faced the waves looked calm and very controlled, as if he truly understood the rhythm of the ocean. His movements were precise and full of confidence. For some people on the boat, the story might have sounded like ordinary praise, but for Bull, those words felt different. All this time, Bull had always believed he was the best among them. Bull was used to being seen as the strongest, the bravest, and the most skilled at facing the waves. Hearing that someone else was considered better immediately disturbed his ego. The reputation Bull had built all this time felt like it was being challenged. That feeling of rejection slowly turned into anger that Bull struggled to control. Without thinking much, Bull invited Rob to look for the man Archie had talked about. At first, that meeting in the middle of the ocean could have just been a normal introduction between fellow surfers, but everything changed when Bull's emotions took over. Bull attacked first. The foreign man tried to get away, but Bull kept chasing him all the way to the shore. What happened was no longer just competition between surfers. It had already turned into an explosion of ego that couldn't accept reality. From the boat, Alex accidentally recorded the whole incident with her camera. The footage captured a side of Bull they had never seen before. In the background, Sam's reaction could be heard clearly, showing her disapproval of what Bull had done. When Bull returned to the boat, his body looked full of wounds, but what was more noticeable was the change in the atmosphere between them. Sam still treated his injuries, but the tone of her question sounded sharp. Sam wanted to know the reason behind that brutal action. Bull only gave a short answer. According to him, the man tried to compete with him. There was no regret in his response, only justification. That night, the footage Alex recorded was played inside the boat's cabin. In the dim light of the lamp, they all watched the incident on the beach again. No one cheered, no one defended him. There was only a long silence. The faces watching looked full of disappointment. Bull himself sat there without much reaction, as if what they had just seen wasn't something worth arguing about. When the questions started touching more personal matters, Bull's attitude hardened again. His tone turned rough and defensive.
Yeah, well, imagine if your mom saw that.
Oh, yeah, right, of course, yeah. You can...
Sam eventually chose to leave the cabin. She didn't want to get involved further in the argument. Rob followed her, trying to calm the situation. From there, Sam began to see a clearer difference between the two of them. Rob looked much calmer and able to control himself. Meanwhile, Bull seemed to get triggered by his emotions more easily. Sam's feelings slowly changed. She felt safer being near Rob. That night, Sam chose to spend time alone with Rob on the small boat tied next to the main boat. They talked quietly in the middle of the dark and calm sea. From a distance, Bull only watched without saying anything. Bull held his harmonica, then slowly blew into it. The sound that came out felt heavy, as if it carried anger he never truly expressed. The next morning, the way people on the boat treated Bull started to change. They were no longer as open as before. The distance between them was clear, even though it was never talked about directly. Archie still tried to keep the atmosphere calm. He tried to stay in the middle so the conflict wouldn't grow bigger, but the tension that had already appeared was hard to completely remove. The situation finally reached its peak when Rob, in uncontrollable emotion, threw Bull's harmonica into the sea. For others, it might have been just a small object. But for Bull, the harmonica was more than just a musical instrument. It was the only way Bull usually used to calm his mind. Seeing that object sink into the sea immediately triggered new anger. Archie finally dived into the water to retrieve it, trying to prevent their argument from becoming worse. But from that moment on, something inside Bull changed. He felt like he had not only lost his favorite object, but also lost Sam's attention. His jealousy slowly turned into resentment that he kept silent. When Rob and Sam stopped at a small island to rest, the situation heated up again. Sam was sunbathing, alone on the beach, when Bull approached quietly. Bull tried to take a role that wasn't actually his. At first, Sam thought the person approaching her was Rob. She didn't immediately realize who was actually standing behind her. But when Sam realized it was Bull, everything was already too late. Panic broke out immediately. Sam tried to move away, and the commotion became unavoidable. Rob, who saw the incident, was instantly triggered with anger. He almost got into another fight with Bull. The atmosphere on the beach suddenly turned chaotic until the other crew rushed to separate them before the situation got worse. Captain Joe finally stepped in. With a firm voice, Joe stopped everything before things completely got out of control.
Bull, either you, let's just call it a misunderstanding. What do you want to do? Get on the boat now!
They returned to the boat in a much more tense atmosphere than before. Bull briefly tried to apologize, but for Sam, the fear she had just felt hadn't disappeared yet. Her reaction was still full of caution. Bull responded in a defensive tone, clearly not ready to accept what had happened. Seeing the situation becoming harder to control, Captain Joe finally made a tough decision.
Can't see him looking things, you, mate. I was just trying to apologise.
As a consequence of his actions, Bull was taken to the shore of a small island and left there alone for the night. No friends, no one Bull could talk to, only the sound of the wind, the crashing waves, and the darkness of the night on that remote island. In that silence, for the first time Bull had to face something he couldn't fight with strength, himself. On that island far from anywhere, Bull walked back and forth with heavy breaths. The anger inside him only kept rising. The trip that Bull once saw as an adventure and a chance to prove himself now felt like the biggest humiliation of his life. Instead of calming down, being left alone only made his hatred grow deeper. In his mind, only one thing kept repeating. Bull wanted revenge on Rob and Sam. The next morning, the sea looked very calm. The waves moved slowly, as if there were no problems at all. But behind that calmness, something was happening. While Rob was on his surfboard, he saw Bull's board floating in the distance. The board was empty. No one was around it. At almost the same time, Captain Joe realized Bull was no longer on the island where he had been left. The most logical assumption appeared right away. Bull had most likely managed to swim back to the boat. And that assumption turned out to be true. Bull had already returned first and quietly taken control of the situation on the boat. Bull moved quickly, looking for anything that could be used as a tool to threaten or hurt someone. The boat that used to be a relaxed place had now turned into a dangerous one. Captain Joe tried to chase him using the dinghy. Without Bull knowing, Rob had actually managed to sneak back onto the boat. Their encounter became unavoidable. A brutal fight broke out in the narrow space of the boat that kept rocking because of the waves. But Bull, driven by anger, eventually managed to knock Rob down. Bull then tied Rob's hands to the anchor chain, making him a prisoner. For Bull, it was a way to release the revenge he had been holding inside. After that, Bull made one clear demand. Bull wanted Sam. There was no negotiation. When Tubes tried to start the boat's engine to stop the chaos, Bull immediately beat him until he was helpless. With his injured body, Tubes could only return to the cabin and tell Sam that she was now the main target.
What if we can get to Archie's cabin?
Meanwhile, Rob had already been taken prisoner outside the boat. Archie, who was still half conscious from the effects of alcohol, was forced by Bull to control the boat's steering.
Bobby's hanging around. Not too drunk, are you?
Meanwhile, Bull walked to the kitchen and started preparing something with a very calm attitude. That calmness actually felt more frightening. As night began to fall, Bull called Tubes, Alex, and Sam to gather at the dining table. The atmosphere in the room was full of tension. No one dared to speak. The silence between them felt more oppressive than any threat. In front of them, Bull then revealed something that had been hidden all this time. Bull played a recording that showed Alex secretly recording private moments without permission. That fact immediately hit Tubes. He never expected Alex to do something like that. For Bull, it became a reason to justify everything he had done. In his mind, that betrayal made his actions feel justified. The situation grew even more heated when Bull started forcing his will. But in the middle of that chaos, Sam saw a small chance to escape. Tubes and Alex tried to distract Bull as much as they could. They created small disturbances so Sam would have a chance to get away. On the deck of the boat, slippery from seawater, a chase broke out. The situation was chaotic and full of tension. At the same time, Rob was still struggling to free himself from the anchor chain tied around his hands. Every movement felt heavy, but Rob kept forcing himself to find a way to break free. When Bull was almost about to reach Sam, the situation suddenly changed. Rob finally managed to free himself from the chain. Without wasting time, Rob immediately joined the others to face Bull. This time, they no longer held back. A fierce struggle broke out on the boat that kept rocking with the waves. After a fairly intense fight, they finally managed to bring Bull down. His body collapsed, and not long after that, Bull lost consciousness. The terror that had haunted the boat since morning finally stopped. For the first time, they could breathe a little easier, but the problem wasn't truly over. They all knew Bull was still dangerous. If he woke up again, everything could happen all over again. On the other hand, none of them wanted to go as far as becoming a killer. After a short discussion, they chose a middle path. While still unconscious, Bull was moved to a small boat. The boat was then tied with a long rope to the main boat. That way, Bull wasn't directly on the boat with them, but he also wasn't simply abandoned in the sea. A few moments later, Bull started to regain consciousness. As soon as he opened his eyes, Bull immediately understood the situation that was happening. With the remaining strength he had, Bull began pulling the rope tied to the small boat. He tried to move closer to the main boat. He clearly didn't want to be left behind. On the boat, Sam stood holding the rope. Her face looked pale. Her mind was filled with fear that hadn't completely disappeared. She knew that as long as the small boat was still connected to the main boat, the threat was still there. Bull could still come back. With slightly trembling hands, Sam finally made the hardest decision. She released the rope that was tying the small boat. The boat Bull was on slowly began drifting away. The ocean current carried it farther and farther from the main boat. No one spoke. They only stood there, silently, watching from a distance. The boat kept moving away from that place. Bull's figure grew smaller and smaller in the middle of the vast ocean until he finally looked like nothing more than a faint shadow in the distance.